Good morning. Good morning, everyone. You know, I always love the summit. This is our 4th annual summit. It's always hard to get people to come together because it's like seeing old friends. The good news for us is that every year we seem to have more friends. So thank you. Thank you for being with us this morning. My name's Justin Backley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Shared Value Initiative. And we're so happy that you've chosen to join us this morning. We have over 400 people here, and we are so enthusiastic about the ongoing growth of this community. You know, we look forward to and work on this event all year. It's usually a few weeks out that I start to get that feeling of I just want to get there and really engage in these few days of conversation around shared value. You know, I also welcome, for the first year, we're live streaming this event to the shared value community from around the globe. And so I welcome them and look forward to hearing the experience of those who could not be with us in the room today. And can I just point out what an inspiring place to be for the next few days to talk about the role of business in society. Here we are not far from Wall Street, the financial capital of the United States, in a city that often sits at center stage of world events. This ever-present, undividable linkage between business and society, it couldn't be more apparent than in this place. Now, I want to start today actually with a simple question. What's your state of mind when it comes to shared value? Your state of mind when you're doing your work. You know, working on social issues, and one of the great benefits we have of this community is that it's an intensely personal journey for most of you, and the commitment you have to the work you do. And I'm going to return to this question at the end of my comments. So I want you to think about this as we go through my opening comments. Now, I want to tell you a quick story. I want to take you on a quick shared value, global journey for shared value. And there are 3 stops on this journey. The first stop was last year in Japan, where in partnership with Korean, one of our affiliated consulting firms, spent a week in Japan addressing various audiences and meeting with over 50 multinational corporations. You'll hear from Mr. Isazaki, the CEO of Kirin, tomorrow. But I remember visiting their new headquarters just outside of Tokyo. I was happy, of course, to see that Professor Porter's books were on sale in the company store in the lobby, right next to Peter Drucker's books. And as I sat down with his shared value team, I was impressed by even though they were early in their journey on shared value, that they were already thinking about the corporate areas of priority focus for them, where they could make a difference in business and society, and how they would operationalize this concept. Then last year, in October, spending time in Colombia with Nestle, the lead sponsor, with the Inter-American Development Bank, both supporters of the Shared Value Initiative, as they had an event in Colombia. As the room was darkened and the moderator took the stage, she actually started in a way that was quite unexpected. She said, well, we have an unannounced
many of us and many companies to actually question what they really do. And to move from kind of a product-based definition of the company to a definition that reflects the social needs and the social purpose that that company is actually meeting. And these are, again, just some examples, but there are many more. There's now and we're collecting data on this, there's a fascinating change of mission statement now going on in business, in the world, among leading companies. Many companies are changing their mission statement in this way. To define the mission in terms of what their capabilities and what they do allow them to do in society that's valuable, rather than kind of be locked into that more traditional mode of competition and, you know, how they competed historically. Again, this is a very, very exciting and powerful shift that we see going on. And finally, we are now beginning to tackle, you know, in a sense, the last frontier. I shouldn't say last, because I know there's going to be another one. But the last big frontier, and that is in the investment community. Now, where have we come in the investment community in this general view of how businesses should relate to society? Where we start in the investment community is there is no role of business in society, except just to make a profit and pay your taxes and hire people. That's it. Any social activity among a very large portion of the investment communities is just a misuse of shareholders' resources. That's not our job in business. It's not our right to spend shareholders' money on stuff. That's where a lot of investors come from and still come from today. As we see here, though, investment thinking, you know, started evolving, driven less by the investors and more by the clients. Because clients would come to investors and say, well, you know, we want to invest some money with your fund, but we'd kind of like it if you didn't invest in cigarette companies. Because we don't want to put our money in cigarette companies. Because we don't think, you know, they're serving a good social purpose. Okay? And really, investment thinking started to evolve first with what is often called ethical investing. That is, you have negative screens. There's a certain set of companies, no matter, you know, you can invest a portfolio, but you got to keep out of a certain set of companies that are doing things that are unethical or viewed as damaging or harmful to society. That was kind of where the investment community started, grudgingly. Okay, shareholder, if that's what you really want, we won't invest. We will not invest in this company that has money that is investing in Sudan. Okay. We'll whack out a few companies from our portfolios. Over time, this evolved to what is often called sustainable investing, where we started wanting a more positive approach by looking at companies that did well on sustainability measures, ESG measures. And as you know, a whole industry has grown up to both develop these measures and then score companies on these measures and create, you know, rankings on these measures. And there's a whole lot of investment portfolios that are really built on these measures. You know, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, things like that. And that was, if you think about the transition in corporations, it's really the same thing investors are going through. This is the equivalent of the CSR stage, where investors are kind of looking at the world through the lens of, is the company doing well on all these multiple diverse sustainability indicators. Then a relatively small movement, spun out called impact investing. Now this was the plate starting to shift. Because impact investing was all about finding for-profit companies that actually had a social purpose at the core of their strategy. And this is starting to home in on the fundamental idea of shared value. But where we have to go in the investment community is we have to start to understand that actually impact investing is good, but actually to mainstream here, we have to realize that every company has opportunities for shared value, and that those companies that are going to be successful in extractives or pharma or banking or any other field, those companies are going to be successful, who are going to get a competitive advantage, who are going to be productive, who are going to be the most profitable, who are going to have the growth opportunities, are going to be the ones that assimilate and embody shared value thinking. And so instead of having to have a separate asset class and a separate whole investment discipline, the shared value concept really means, for investors, that you have to add another chapter to core investment analysis. Whenever you analyze an industry and whenever you analyze a company, you've got to think about shared value. Because this is going to be profoundly important to growth and productivity and differentiation going forward. That's where we've got to go. The investment community is very skeptical about shared value. They're back where we were in business, here, years ago. Is this really real? Is it material? Can you prove it? Do you have data? That's where the investment community is on this. But they will change as this movement grows, as we generate more and more opportunities and to drive this agenda forward. So where we are is we're now in what I would call the kind of, we're in the middle of going from an idea to a movement. We've gone from really one constituency, mostly companies interested in this, to multi-stakeholders. We have gone from proof of concept to discipline and depth and of insight into actually how to do it. We have gone from sort of one-off examples to more enterprise, structured, organized efforts. We're in that transition. And in order to kind of talk about this further, we have with us today some tremendous leaders that are really on the frontier of really driving new thinking around this concept of shared value in a variety of different areas. So what I'd like to do now is first briefly introduce, well actually let's have them come up and then I'll introduce them briefly. So could we have Jin-Yong? Ari, why don't you just pick a seat, any seat. How are you, sir? Tony, how are you? Nice to see you. Great. So we have three guests in this session who are very, very close friends, personal friends, and also friends of FSG, and also friends of this movement. On the left is Tony Elumelu. Tony is built one of the leading global trans-African companies in Africa as CEO of Standard Bank, but then just has only gone deeper and farther in really becoming a profoundly important business leader in Africa. He has a holding company called Heirs Holdings that makes investments in a variety of different really fundamental businesses in Nigeria and in Africa. And he'll talk about the philosophy with which he makes those investments. And he's also become a leading spokesperson for this idea of Africa capitalism. The idea that actually capitalism is the way to transform Africa, rather than the traditional thinking about aid and other kind of forms. I also I'm very, very proud to tell you that Tony is my student. And, you know, when you're a professor like me, having these incredible students do these things, you just hope you didn't destroy any value, you know. You hope you had something positive to do with it rather than confused him, you know, through being his professor. So Tony, it's so wonderful to have you here. Next to Tony is Jin-Yong Cai, who is the president of the IFC, International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. And what you'll hear from Jin-Yong is that there is a transformation in thinking and practice at the World Bank Group. And IFC has become, in some very important respect, the center of the World Bank Group. And the attitudes and thinking at the World Bank and in many other development entities around the private sector and around how to do development are in a state of dramatic evolution and transformation. And Jin-Yong has been really at the center of this effort, and the IFC has been working in this area, you know, even before the idea of shared value was written about. So Jin-Yong, we're so pleased and so honored that you're here working with us. And then finally, Arif Naqvi from the Abraaj Group. This is one of the world's leading private equity investors right here, sitting here in front of you. And his company, which is a substantial, you know, $7.5 billion under management, private equity group that's investing in many, many parts of the world, particularly the developing world, and is approaching his role as an investor in a very profoundly interesting and different way than investors traditionally have thought about their role. So I think we have three very, very powerful different perspectives here. And in each case, the question we're trying to understand is, you know, how is your role, whatever that role is, how is your role changing? You know, how is shared value informing that role? Kind of where do we go from here? So let's start at the company level with Tony, the business leader level, and then we'll move to the private equity level, and then we'll rise to this level of this gigantic, important, profoundly significant multilateral institution called IFC. So Tony, share with us some of your thoughts about your role as a business leader in Africa, how the private sector matters, and what you're doing to drive this forward.
So first is, you know, speaking after your professor too is also easier, and not just a professor, someone of this stature and size, Professor Michael Porter. But Michael, I'd like to thank you. You, as you know, you are a major source of personal inspiration to me, and so everything I do, largely, I want to give credit to you for the guidance and inspiration. Thank you so much. And I'd like to recognize my fellow panelists. Arif, you were missing conspicuously at Abuja. Well,
apologies.
Okay, and to Jin-Yong, he was also at Abuja last week. And you know, the Abuja event was the WEF, where what they come from Africa was speaking. The theme was inclusive growth and job creation. And to me, coming a week after, a few days after this event, Abuja WEF and discussing shared value is like an extension of the same conversation. I believe that inclusive growth is kind of part of shared value concept. One is at a macro level, however, and it speaks to the changing nature of the world economy, of the investment, of how the private sector is beginning to see its role in the sustainable development and improvement of the world. I am particularly pleased to be sharing a few insights with you all on this very interesting topic, which indeed has shaped my personal business philosophy. At Heirs Holdings, we, as Michael said, we are driven by what I call an economic philosophy of Afro-capitalism, which is at the heart of what we're discussing here, shared value. And this Afro-capitalism is about long-term investment by the private sector in key sectors of the African economy that ultimately help to create both economic prosperity and social wealth. And so for us, it is no longer just about making profit and waiting after making profit to now do things that will impact or help mankind or society. We have seen from experience that if we do both simultaneously, we make money and we actually make a lot of people. We have invested in agri-processing in one of our investments, and this is first in Nigeria. We did not have a juice concentrate, a juice processing plant in the country. So a country of 171 million people, all the juice concentrate is imported. But we saw economic opportunity here. But at the same time, we saw an opportunity to help the society. So we invested in this plant, set up a plant, new technology. And through this process, we were able to buy oranges. Before now, 60% of the farm produce was wasted because of no economic value, lack of storage, etc. But through our juice concentrate plant, we're able to buy everything. We encourage the farmers, they produce more. We make profit. The farmers, the economic empowerment in the community has heightened, increased significantly. They're even encouraged to grow more because they know the market is assured. We're helping the country to conserve foreign exchange. We are helping to improve technology and helping the country to say that the juice concentrate in the country is grown or processed locally. This is the kind of investment we make, and we have seen that when we make decisions to invest in this manner, long-term key sectors that help to make profit but equally help to touch the community we operate in, that it becomes very sustainable, and the community will help to make sure that we succeed. It's okay, do you want to even integrate, do you want to go into farming, do you want land, etc. So that is one of the things we do. We have also extended a little bit beyond the traditional areas of that you see this kind of intervention, and that is in the area of power. We invested recently in power. Power is highly capital intensive, but we also know that access to electricity means a whole lot to people in terms of economic empowerment, in terms of ability to go to school, in terms of even vaccines, health. It touches every facet of human life. And if you know, in Africa, over almost 80% of Africans don't have access to electricity. So investing in this sector, highly capital intensive, profitable, but helping to create employment, helping to direct and indirect employment by the people we directly recruit, but indirect employment by what happens when the SMEs now have access to electricity to power their business, and it will help in with healthcare delivery. Vaccines can be preserved, helping with education. People can have better access to education and even access to electricity to do homework at night. So these are some of what we have started, the investment philosophy we're evolving, we have evolved out of this new philosophy of doing what we say, or what everyone calls it, doing good, doing well and doing good, but doing them simultaneously so that it's integrated, it's part of the DNA of everything we do. It drives the investment philosophy and investment decisions that we make. So for me, for those of us who are attending this kind of, who are going to be spending today and tomorrow discussing shared value concept, we should, one, listen very well, then ask ourselves, what does this mean for our companies? But beyond what this means for our company, it's also the country, at the country level. What does this also mean for our country? In my country, Nigeria, in recent times, some of you have heard about Bring Back Our Girls. And there's a fundamental issue here that I see. And I think if we grow our economy in a manner that's all-inclusive, if we grow our economy in a manner that the prosperity that comes out is shared in a manner that all stakeholders are fully engaged, I believe it will address some of these issues. So as we listen here, it's not just for our company, but we should look at the institutions and the various intervention mechanisms we have in our respective countries and see how we can adapt and apply this whole concept of shared value in what we do. So we'll be sharing more and seeing some of you in the course of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. That's great. So, Arif, talk about, you're an investor. Investors traditionally have been the bad guys, short-term, narrow-minded, ridiculous pressure to harvest rather than invest. Investors are kind of not the heroes of development and the heroes of solving social problems. And let me say very quickly that hopefully and is actually changing. But talk about your group, your work as an investor, and kind of how you're thinking about that, and some of the results that you're seeing as a result.
Thank you, Michael. I actually thought you invited me because I'm a good guy.
You are.
Apologize in advance for the fact that I have a cold. I think this is one of the impacts of pursuing shared value across the globe, which is that you live on an airplane and you never get the rest. So I've been nursing it for a couple of months now, but I think we'll get there. I'm glad you started with that very narrow interpretation of investors. Because, I want to tell you that the investing community is not all about being driven to good by their clients. The investing community does have, in certain elements of it, a soul. You've got to just look hard for it sometimes. But it's there, okay? And the good thing is more and more of us are emerging and demonstrating that investing does not just have to be about pursuing the profit imperative. And if you ask any investor, if you ask any businessman around the world, what sort of a company do you run? Generally speaking, the answer is not going to be, I run a really pathetic company. Generally speaking, they're not going to say, my company is satisfactory. They'll say, I run a great company. Now, the problem is a lot of people don't figure out the fact that to run a great company, you have to first run a good company. And to run a good company, which is embraced by all the stakeholders, by civil society, by the employees, by your investors, and so on. In order to run a good company, you have to embrace shared value. There's no two ways around it. And I think more and more people around the world are beginning to realize that this is the case. And although I am at best a frustrated economist, I'd like to say that creating shared value as a concept is the first step that eventually economists will take to pricing the value of human emotion. And what do I mean by that? When I say pricing the value of human emotion, economists have created a business model and an economic model around just about everything, except the price of human emotion. When the housewife in Minneapolis does not buy that extra pound of oranges on a given day, and that is replicated by millions of housewives across the United States, that reflects its way into the price of Walmart stock. So the decision of not buying that pound of oranges is driven by emotion. I don't feel rich today. I don't feel good today. Eventually, when you take society, when you take business, and you take the fact that we are all looking to run better businesses, better corporations, and so on, this whole idea of shared value has to be embedded in the way people think. Now, we talked about, earlier you talked about the role of government, and I have to say governments in themselves have enormous limitations. When you talked about the fact that governments are beginning to realize that they need to produce better regulation, they need to be in the business of governance, the problem is you're speaking and preaching to the converted. The government of Australia can find it much easier to embrace that thinking than the government of Zimbabwe, and there's much more than A to Z that's involved there. It also comes from the stage of development. And I suppose I'd like to say we've been lucky in that we've been investing in parts of the world where, as yet, we're still focused on bringing people out of poverty. We're still focused on a lot of issues that are not driven by just, feeling good and being good. And, I've developed a perspective investing in these markets from Latin America across to Southeast Asia, and virtually all the continents of the South-South trading bloc. And I've come to the realization, and my colleagues have come to the realization, that the businesses that we operate and the value proposition that we create cannot be separated from the societies in which we live and the societies in which we operate. And for us, private equity investing has always been about long-term value creation. The good thing about private equity is we're not judged in hours or minutes or a ticker on the stock exchange. We are enabled by our investors to put money to work and deploy it over long periods of time. And what that means is that we can work with businesses to really move off just that profit drive and motivation and move into what is it that is going to make those businesses better. So I suppose from the very first day that I started Abraaj, 11 very, very, very long years ago, I had a lot of black hair back then. I think we were driven, myself and a bunch of colleagues, by the idea that we could actually do well for our investors and we could really change the operating environment that we had found when we started investing. And this has been a great journey because not only can you make a lot of money while you're doing it, but you can actually tangibly affect society. So from the very first day that we started, we put 5% of our top line into pursuing sustainable causes in the regions in which we operated. We decided on following education, entrepreneurship, and diversity as the three main pillars by which we embraced our concept of shared value and created opportunities in the markets in which we were operating, and found that if you do it in this way, then what you're really doing is empowering potential. And you can create the returns, you can create the opportunities in society, and all your stakeholders are going to benefit enormously. And so over time, and over 200 companies in which we've invested across continents, what we've proved is that it is possible to reward shareholders and investors at the same time as embracing stakeholders and providing a much greater resonance to the voice, if you like, of the domestic populations. And I think the only way you can do it, and this is a very, very important point, far too many companies they like to think they're good companies. They like to think they're doing the right thing. But what they do automatically is they create a foundation, okay? And 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 people within their company are the do-gooders who spend a fair amount of money through that foundation in trying to achieve outcomes. I believe the only way that you're going to be able to have the kind of culture that you were talking about with Nestle earlier, the kind of culture that we've created at Abraaj, is you've got to embed it in the social fabric of the organization. Creating just that foundation is not a sufficient enough exercise or outcome. Every single person that works in your company has to live those values, embed them, and do them as part of their daily life and their investing activity. And so I feel that this is a journey that is yet incomplete. I feel this is a journey that will never have a completion line until we have all societies in a point where we can say we've brought genuine prosperity. But it's great fun doing it in markets that have not yet gotten to the point of maturity that we're fortunate enough to find ourselves here. And I think that if enough businesses embrace it, and I've known Tony for a while and I've seen the businesses that he's doing, and absolutely the impact that he's having in his market is large. And of course, the IFC is, by definition, a spectacular investor in these areas. And it's a great partnership. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Arif. That's great. And I secretly knew you were a good guy. And actually, you're here because you're a world leader at this. All of these people are world leaders at this. So, Jin-Yong, talk about the kind of journey that the IFC and the World Bank have been on. How the organization is thinking about development more broadly, and specifically, what's the IFC doing to have more impact and really transform the economies in which the World Bank is trying to work with?
Thank you, Michael. Let me start by just give a little bit of background about the World Bank. The institution, the World Bank is a group of 5 entities, because this has relevance on what I'm trying to explain. At the beginning of the World Bank Group, that was right after the war, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development was set up in 1944 together with IMF. And the mission at that time was really extending credits to European reconstruction efforts and to the governments. Really, IBRD was pretty much a bank of the governments in Europe. And fast forward, infrastructure were built and things were moving okay. And at that time, the shareholders realized just government alone is not enough. So in the early 50s, 7 years later, IFC was created. And IFC's mission was very much replicate the IBRD model, but deal with companies. The first transaction IFC did was in 1956, I think, in Brazil. Financed a power plant invested by Siemens. So after that, the World Bank in the 80s set up called the MIGA, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, and there's another entity really dealing with investment disputes. So when you think of the history of the World Bank, it's evolving what Michael describing, kind of the role of government, private sector in development. And there was a time, I remember, I'm from China, in the early 80s, the World Bank IBRD part was very dominant in the development business. And really it was the only source of financing for infrastructure or for large investment projects in emerging markets. And I started my career in the World Bank in 1990. Even at that time, the bank was very big. IFC was a tiny shop. And I spent about 4 years before Jim came, my boss, he went to the dark side. So I went to an investment bank. Actually, this is a hotel I'm very familiar with. I was with Goldman Sachs. So we were forced to stay here for a long time. And actually, it's owned by Goldman, this hotel. Shared value. So so I remember I left in 1994. And so 2012, Jim, he took the position. So he hired me and returned to the World Bank. You look at what happened is after almost 20 years, IFC has grown from a tiny part of the World Bank Group, become very major force. So just give you a couple of numbers. One is each year how much finance you commit to. And we do about $25 billion IFC. And the IBRD, the original one, now it's about 17 billion. And then there's a window called the International Development Association, IDA, which is really the donors' money to give to the lowest income per capita countries. Really, the concessionary window, that's about 18 billion a year. So when you look at the overall business, about 50 billion plus a year from the World Bank Group, IFC has really grown from a tiny proportion to a large proportion. there's a reason for it. And this is linked with what Michael has said earlier. If we really want to achieve the goal of eradicating poverty and to get there, the official development aid, ODA, and the traditional financing just is not possible to achieve that goal. Tony mentioned power. I was in Abuja, and we were in a session. Africa, as a continent, only 20+ people have access to electricity. Without power, we don't talk about anything else. To reach 80% access, we are talking about $800 billion to $1 trillion. That's the capital needed. India, really great hope. But India has a problem also on infrastructure. They estimate about $100 billion a year needed. So there's no way, if we really want to achieve the goal, to really move people's living standard to the next level, and just rely on the government, on the official source of capital. So we come down to this shared value idea. IFC, when we started business in 1954, even today, this is very much is kind of a practice, because the shareholder, we're owned by 184 governments. They keep saying, why don't you just make money? Because we have this balance sheet about $85 billion, no government guarantee, we have to really earn the money. They said, you have to bring that project in with what we call the development impact. It has to be something beyond just make money. So we have, in terms of how we do business, Arif knows this because we work with him very extensively. And just show how much money you make is absolutely not enough. You got to show what value you add to the community and to the environment, to a lot of other factors which are very much part of the shared value consideration. But, Michael, to be honest, I only came across your article a few years ago before I joined IFC. I said, wow, this is amazing. You put a lot of things in a framework, very neat, and give the business, at least give me a framework to explain what we are trying to accomplish. I do agree with your assessment. The jury is still out in the sense of how we can work together between governments, private business, and NGOs. And if I reflect, I've been in IFC about 20 months, where I spend most of the time is really the struggle between, is making profit bad for development? And if the World Bank is a big organization. That's where what Michael is saying. We're going through a transformation. I'm going to explain. Many part of my colleagues who have been there for a long time, there's this view, when you make profit, something must be wrong, okay? You're not developmental. I often hear, you guys just do deals. This is part of the World Bank colleagues. IFC colleagues saying, this guy keep talking. They never focus on sustainability of delivering the long-term solution for development. Sure. If the business is not profitable, there's no more second round, finished, bankrupt, right? And you have NGOs. I spend so much time in my life, now deal with NGOs. There's a perception that when you work with private business, you are wrong. Basically, I have to say this is where I often bother. I say, look, please explain what kind of authority you have to challenge that, because we're benefiting the poor. We're helping to find a solution. I welcome a conversation, but please let's have a civilized conversation. So this is really, that's why I'm seeing still work in progress. For the World Bank, under Jim Kim, he came in, he realized if we really want to, he came in, he's a very inspirational leader. He said, look, my goal is to turn the bank into a solution bank. We want to, he has two twin goals, eradicate poverty and create a shared prosperity by 2030. So that's costs a lot. Clearly, if we only do $50 billion a year, even if we double, $100 billion, it's not a big deal. So how can we use this platform, the multilateral, not only the World Bank Group and also other Asia Development Bank, Africa Development Bank, use that special kind of what I call the point of convergence of private sector, government, and NGOs, use that platform to facilitate a very, I would say, deeper conversation on creating shared value. I do believe the business, if they're only pursuing short-term profit, or even the medium term, is if you don't create enough demand in your market, which is part of the shared value, if you do not create a enabling ecosystem, eventually you create a lot of customers for you. And if you read Michael's article, there are a lot of explanations. It's just not sustainable. So there are numerous examples. We have a couple of clients sitting here. One is from Brazil, okay, Trey Banco. You can share with him what they are doing. It's a fabulous job. Really tailored towards the lowest, what's called the bottom of the pyramid, really create a market for their business, and business not only growing fast and so profitable. Another very good example, I don't know if this public information, is a low-income housing development company. IFC is invested in Mexico, and called Vente, and the CEO is here too. When I visit those investments, you feel proud. Actually, Arif will be very proud too in doing those investments. This company is going to be IPO'd soon. They built, I don't know how many have been to Mexico City, 20-some million people, maybe 1/4 live on the shanty town on the hill. So what they did, they built those houses, about 30, 40 square meters. And to allow those people, for the first time, have their own home, they provide a mortgage. And they maintain their community in such a high standard, they have internet, the children can be educated. By the way, this is the first piece of asset these people would ever have. You give them a mortgage, over time those house price, the value going up. And they can transition to a bigger house. So they're building their assets through this mortgage, through this business. When you think of just in Mexico City, 5 million people living still in those shanty towns. And these are the examples, in my view, through our investment in many parts of the world, you learn this is doable. But the challenge is always scale up. And we do a lot of investment in extractives. And we do a lot of things in many education. There's a beautiful school in Kenya called the Bridge School. And it's really $6 per month for kids who never would have education. And it profitable. And the IFC is an investor together with Bill Gates and a few others. I think, indeed, we need to have all those good examples and continue to promote the idea, to educate. I'm very confident, because I spend a lot of time in the business community, investment community, more and more people are looking for long-term sustainability in terms of value creation. I think it's, that's why I feel this forum like this is very helpful to continue to really bring the idea into more and more people, let people think about it, particularly among the business. So, Michael, that's what I have.
Well, thank you, Jin-Yong. So let me just ask a few follow-up questions, and I think Jin-Yong, you kind of hit on, I think, one of the areas I'd like to talk about, and that is obstacles. Okay, so I think all three of these people have. There's no doubt in your mind that you can create shared value. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that businesses are and can have a profound impact on every dimension of society and the communities in which people live. And yet, as Jin-Yong said, this is still a work in process. Everybody doesn't agree. So Tony, let's go back to you. What are the obstacles you find to what you're doing, to the shared value perspective, to actually putting this into practice in your world? What are the obstacles, and how do we overcome those?
I think the greatest obstacle is, in my viewpoint, the government.
That's right.
We need government. So anyway, we need government to understand that what is good for the private sector is good for the society, and that if private sector does well, the society will prosper. Mm-hmm. We need government to know that if you look at employment, government on its own cannot create employment. But if government could put the enabling policies in place, employment will be created. If government could be less involved in controlling enterprises, in owning enterprises, and get the private sector more involved, you create more prosperity for everyone. You look at the power sector, for instance. When President Obama visited Africa last year and came up with the Power Africa initiative, I think they decided to experiment with just 6 or 7 countries that were most progressive in trying to fundamentally improve access to electricity. There's so much money, I believe Arif and the IFC, so much money for people who would like to invest in power space on the continent. But you need to remove the rules, the obstacles, the policies that do not enable investors to invest long-term on the continent in this space. You have some project development that takes about 15, 20 years before it gets off. So we need government to realize and help in a profound manner to realize first that policies they put in place can help to create prosperity for all, or can help to diminish or even eliminate it completely. We need government to know that where private sector succeeds in a long-term fashion, they help government to achieve their own development goals for the community. Now, how have we handled it in our environment? I founded the Elumelu Foundation, which Mike is a patron of, and we try to engage government across the continent to begin to create a more competitive and sustainable business environment. We, through advocacy, try to get government to understand the role they should play. So in Nigeria, for instance, we managed to working with the government of Nigeria now to put in place a National Competitiveness Council of Nigeria, which is helping to create a more competitive business environment in realization that if businesses do well, the society will benefit from it. And as it succeeds in Nigeria, it will be signaling to other African countries, others will pick up. And hopefully, across the continent, we'll have a continent that has a good environment in terms of business and can attract long-term investment that we need to help create some of these prosperity discussions we're having.
So, Tony, this is a delicate question, but why don't you think government gets it? What's in their way?
You know, when you have an air-conditioned room and someone is cleaning his forehead, you know, it's a tough one. No, I think first is for government to understand the limitations they have, and for government to know what they are structured to do and what they cannot do. You know, government gets at times and that is the whole essence why I like this concept of share value and why African capitalism is important to me as a philosophy that can help create sustainable economic development for the continent. Government used to think that, until they do something, it cannot be in the best interest of all. But we have seen that, as some of my friends have said, it is even in the best interest of the private sector to make sure that you grow and empower the consumers. If you don't, they will not be there to support your business in the long run. When we talk of electricity, for instance, people talk about two things, availability and affordability. And I always tell people that, can we just first focus on availability, and when it's available, affordability will come. If government were coming into that space, government will come in to deal more with affordability than availability. If an area is not, and that speaks to the conversation you're having at the IFC and World Bank, if businesses are not profitable or viable, they will not be there to sustain or help eliminate or address some of these mankind's needs. Take telecommunication space, for instance, in Africa. There was a time the tele-density, in fact, the number of people who had access to telephone on the continent was so low. And government was in charge, in control of telecommunications. And in the early 2000s, government decided to let go and allow the private sector to come into that space. Private sector has come into that space, and today, Teledensity has increased. If you look at a country like Nigeria that had less than 500,000 telephone subscribers before, today it has over 100 million. And when telephones started in the country, you would pay to get a telephone line. But with private sector involvement and competition, today they give you incentives to own a line, and you don't pay anything. So government needs to know. And so it requires advocacy, engagement with the government, this kind of forum we need to have, like, and that's, Michael, what part of what you're doing in Africa. Your intervention in Rwanda, you know the kind of impact it's having. And also, I know when you address the National Competition Council of Nigeria, the empathy remains. And so we need to keep engaging with the political leaders, governments. They need to know their limitations. They need to know what government in the 21st century should be doing. And that is just create the enabling environment and allow private sector to help solve it. But regulate very well. Point people in the right direction. I think that's what is the missing point.
Arif, would you pick up on that question?
Sure.
What are the obstacles? You all are deeply imbued with this philosophy of shared value at multiple levels, and you're going out there making these investments. You know, what are the challenges you're facing? Why are you facing them?
So Tony answered a question around government, and then you pushed a little bit further. And then I have to say, there's an elephant in the room that none of us have talked about. It's called corruption. Okay? It's called corruption, and it's called leakage, and it's called lack of trust. The reason why governments don't work well with civil society in the world that the three of us inhabit and invest in, the reason why governments don't work well with civil society and civil society doesn't like government in return, is because there is a perception and a level of mistrust that exists. Now, I am a firm believer in the fact that businesses, especially businesses that span national borders, have also got to have something called a corporate foreign policy. They have to know what they stand for, okay? And businesses like us are easy to put on podiums because we've proven the fact that you can do things the right way. But the real reality of the people that you need to put on podiums and listen to the stories of are the unsung heroes, the people that practice corporate governance in societies that are not known for that, okay? What's our job? Our job is to find those business people, find those entrepreneurs, and empower them, and give them the tools and the opportunity, the kind of people you were talking about earlier in Mexico and elsewhere in the world, where you find that very talented entrepreneur and you help grow them. So I come from an industry that historically, the private equity industry is, generally speaking, you know, especially after the Mitt Romney process, not known to be the good guys, right? They're kind of known to be the people that stick their hands into a black box and like alchemists come out and turn base metal into gold. The reality is that the private equity industry is actually one of the greatest forces for social change and good that has yet not discovered that fact for itself. Because, laugh a bit more, because that's just the reality, right? We still don't realize how much power and resonance this industry has because we invest in companies, we don't invest in stocks. We invest in companies for the long term, and we have the ability to change outcomes and value propositions. And what I mean by that is there is an alliance. Where does the private equity industry get its money from? It gets it from sovereign wealth funds and from large pension plans and state funds. Whose money is that? That's good, honest, simple people who are saving money. It's their money. That's where we get our capital from. And if you ask the people that underlie the baseline for where that money is coming from, they'll say, do good. Don't just invest to make money, but do good as well. So the reality is we're all converging towards the point, Michael, where you said investors are driving the investing community into doing things better. It is because limited partners, investors, sovereign wealth funds, everyone is realizing that unless we invest in the future, we're not going to get it right. So you asked about roadblocks. Government was one. I'd say lack of trust is a very fundamental area that we have to deal with. And I'd like to tell you a story about an investment that the IFC and us made together in Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is a country that all of you know has a narrative around terrorism, around negativity, and so on. We acquired a business that was a virtual monopoly in the power generating sector. We're talking about power, so it needs to be, let's talk about it. And this business was a business that generated electricity for 20 million people. And it was the most mistrusted company in the country because not only was it losing half the electricity it generated through pilferage and theft, but nobody could rely on it. There were power outages in the city of 16, 17 hours a day, and 20 million people not getting electricity. We sometimes forget that electricity is the cornerstone for everything. Power means the housewife can do the things she needs to do, the kid can study, people can work in industry and so on. So when we acquired this business, nobody trusted us. Nobody understood the value proposition. Between 2009 and 2013, we took a business that was losing money hand over foot, $100 million a year, transformed it into a business that was making nearly $300 million a year, brought in investment of nearly $1 billion, changed the outlook of that business. And do you know how we did that? We did it by engaging the community, not by anything else. We actually didn't do anything dramatic and engineering-wise and fix some fantastic plants. What we did is we got the community to start trusting the power utility. And what we did were little things. We brought the kids that were out in the streets and creating mayhem, we put them into football and started putting them together into sport, and then said, through that you'll go back into education. We started identifying and naming large corporations that were stealing electricity and made people coalesce into cooperatives that in turn enabled the power company to turn around and say that if this entire area is paying its bills, then it does not deserve load shedding. Transformed the business, transformed the environment through the cooperation of people. So we built trust. Okay? In environments and countries that we operate in, that is a very important thing to focus on, because then you can get over so many other issues. Corporate governance is at least as important as political leadership. I can't affect political leadership in the countries in which I invest in. People choose them or they choose themselves, right? We have a lot of countries in our world where people choose themselves, and we all do business with them and think through that hopefully they'll get better. But the real reality is if you go down to the people level and you create shared value amongst businesses and you enable them to understand that corporate governance is the first step, then enable them to work through process and thinking. And going back to my first example of private equity, if a business, a typical large private equity firm in the West, will have a couple of hundred investments, if it can convene each of those investments to spend a couple of $1 million a year, which everybody can in that world, into enabling frameworks to be set in place for shared value, every single private equity firm can generate $200 or $300 million in value in making the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And that, I feel, is what excites me. That's why I like being on your platform.
A quick follow-up. You buy these companies.
Yes, sir.
Do you buy them because they already get shared value? Or do you buy them and teach them or help them understand shared value?
Okay, I think shared value is a very critical principle and pillar of what we do. But let's not forget one thing. We are entrusted with money from our investors to generate financial returns. The fact that we do everything else is a great yardstick. But the underlying principle behind which money is given is to create financial returns. When I talked earlier about the nexus converging, the converging opportunity between investors that think more and more about giving money to firms that deploy it well and investment companies that deploy it well. When you think about the fact that superior returns can be achieved by identifying the good companies that have the ability to become great companies. So it is a very important component of what we do. We have within Abraaj an index that we call the Abraaj Sustainability Index, ASI. And now more and more businesses outside of us are using it to measure the investments in companies that they do. And it runs along 4 pillars and 40 very easily identifiable, distinguishable areas where we rank businesses. And so because of that, it enables us to work out within our portfolio of businesses which are the ones that are taking the right steps to becoming sustainable and engaged. And all of this, by the way, within our business, and this is what I'd encourage more and more investment companies to do, all of our area and work around sustainability and thinking and shared value reports to an external body, which is external to Abraaj, which is made up of global experts, chaired by my good friend Jane Nelson right over there. And these people rank us, they measure us, they say, are they doing the right thing? And if enough businesses start becoming accountable to experts in this field, all of our work is going to become better and better.
Perfect. Well, we have a limited time. Let me ask a kind of a final question to all of you. So, you know, we're here. This is the annual opportunity for the many of us now that are working on shared value and driving this concept and driving the implementation and driving the impact of this concept. This is where we get together and talk about where do we go from here. And I think we have a rich panel, a set of panels over the coming couple of days on various dimensions of that question. I guess what I'd like to ask each of you is, what is your advice? You know, how do we turn this into truly a movement? How do we get over these obstacles? Jin-Yong, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think we need a lot more successful examples, and using those examples to explain why this is a good business. And not only the global companies, which the name you already listed, I think many companies from emerging markets. I think I often believe telling a story is much more powerful than telling a theory, because these concepts, there are so many different concepts. Actually, Michael, one thing I've been thinking is really, if you go to Nigeria, I mean, if Professor Porter said there's a shared value, and they're all confused. You got to find a way to be able to deliver the key message through telling what is good, why working with along the value chain, why you do have to do some school for the farms you're buying your cocoa, and it's going to be good for the long term for business because it creates a much solid value chain, and you reduce risk. You make your risk profile lower, and you have capital cost lower. So in a way that I think we need to have more concrete examples and to really get into how you get it done from beginning, which people think this is an interesting idea, to eventually they become a practitioner. I think that would be very useful in addition to, this forum is very useful, but also going to emerging markets, particularly where things are vulnerable and there are a lot of capital will be deployed and capital is needed. And I think that will be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. More stories, and how do you get it done? Yeah. Tony.
Yeah, I think two things. First is we need to get people to understand the philosophy of shared value, the REC concept. People need to understand that it is supposed to be embedded in what the DNA and the fabric of companies and societies. People need to understand it's different from doing well than doing good. At times you hear people, the narrative, there's a confusion. So I would say people need to understand this very well. And two is to put the people who make decisions together, either at regional levels or global level. So just put them together and say, you've been doing this business for a while. If you look at it this way and show some use some empirical data to support this. And just like James said, stories, if people see examples, is stronger. So say, okay, we're not just preaching shared value for the fun of it, but indeed there's a positive correlation between adopting this as your DNA and in even helping your business to do better. I think that missing link, if we can bridge it with the people who actually make the decisions at company levels and at national level. Because for me, shared value, just like African capitalism, requires both, it applies both to organization companies as well as to government. Because there's a limit to what companies can do along this line if the right government enabling environment is not put in place. So in summary, two things. proper understanding of the doctrine of shared value, and 2, putting together people who can make things happen, and let it be like a movement. I was at the United Nations last month to give a talk on the next MDG. At fora like that, also where we need to take it to the next level, let people become more aware and see that it does help mankind in so many ways.
Thanks, Tony. Arif?
Just don't give up. We're just at the start of this process, and I think the world is going to be a much nicer place. I mean, just imagine what will happen to our world if we all not only embrace this, but continue to develop this thinking of shared value and continue to drive that opportunity. You know, I guess the only disagreement I've had with my friend Jin-Yong in the last hour is he referred to that world as emerging markets. I think, you know, I call them global growth markets. It's where the growth of our planet is going to come from. The average age in these markets that we are talking about is 26. This is an age where people consume. This is an age where they're full of hope. This is an age where opportunity is around the corner and is beckoning. And the more we embrace shared value, the more we give resonance to their dreams and ambitions, I think the greater ability we will all have to making the world a better place. We have here the capital. We have here the intellectual bandwidth. And we have there opportunity that is going to fuel the growth of the world. Let's marry these things, and let's just not stop talking about it.
Michael, can I just have one thing I want to say? I think the technology has created a new opportunity to do the things the traditional business model cannot do, which can be very much linked with shared value. And I don't, you know, some of you may following this capital market, Alibaba. Okay, it's big name, big number. Actually, when you look at our business model, it's the most amazing business in connecting the bottom pyramid, yes, providing access to finance. Otherwise, the traditional model would never be able to do. Connecting small and medium enterprise, you know, grandma making shoes in the remote village. Right now, Alibaba can enable them to go to the world market. It's the most amazing, I would say, development in the recent years. I think the young people, that's where, you know, I was in Lagos, talked to a group of young entrepreneurs. They're all dreaming to be a Jack Ma. I said, well, what do we need to do? They said, look, we don't manufacture a lot because our electricity is too expensive. And, you know, deliver the thing, you sit in a traffic jam for 3 hours, it's not going to work. And you know, you don't have the port to really get the commodity in. So, but on the other hand, even though these are the challenges, also great opportunities. So I would say the younger generation, with the technology, with what they see in the world, I think create a very, I would say, the new opportunity for us to be able to push this idea, you know, to a much larger group of people beyond just corporate headquarters.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Well, we have a bit of time for a few questions from the floor. Yeah. Who would like to take this opportunity to ask a question? A couple of them. Yes, sir.
Good morning.
There we go.
Good morning. Fascinating. My name is Marcos Nita. I work with the United Nations Development Program. The conversation about the governments, and I think you know, you just mentioned, Tony, the next Millennium Development Goals. The next Millennium Development Goals, or the Sustainable Development Goals, are being negotiated now. My question has to do about the role of the governments and the fact the governments don't get it. Why don't they get it? In business are different. Do you have the pure economists' notion of the business, you have the share value notion of the business, and everything in between? Are we asking governments to provide a new set of regulations and that facilitate share value types of business, or are we still asking the governments to provide an enabling environment for any kind of business? Is that a difference what we should be asking governments to do now? Because business has been asking for an enabling environment forever, for any kind of business. Shall we limit what we're asking governments to do to advance share values?
Simply, My view is that, you saw that chart that Michael put up earlier where as proportions of GDP, the private sector, the government, and the NGO sector, the private sector contributes the overwhelming majority, right? I think that governments, especially in that part of the world, I think governments here have a role to play, which is in the OECD countries, they need to put together regulations and thought processes that can be emulated. And I think in our world, in the growth markets, governments just need to get out of the way. That's what they need to do. Because they're not very good, they're not very driven by the right principles. They need to do the regulatory bit, they need to do the governance bit, and just get out of the way. And thank you very much.
Can I say on this, the new development goals? It's very interesting. This is talk about the government. Government has lots of aspiration, making this big announcement. I often wonder how we're going to get there. There's not enough. Like every once in a while, UN, World Bank will announce a lot of things, but where's the meat, right? You got to find the financing. You got to make sure this thing can be done. I think the challenge what Arif was saying is in the global growth market, I think the government sometimes forgot the best execution in delivering those results is the private sector. And because this, what Arif was talking about, this power company in Pakistan, when we took this, 50% line loss.
Yeah.
Someone stealing. It's run by the government. And eventually found the biggest one not paying the bill is the government agency. This is the problem. So in Africa, I keep talking about, everyone talking about, oh, don't give us aid, give us investment. Say, that's great, but the investment need to have a return. You got to have a discipline. In power sectors, in Nigeria in particular, it's not like building a lot new. You need to build a lot more. The first thing first is stop the stealing. That's really the issue. The issue is when you think the government got to realize the role it plays critical, but cannot, they should not do the things. It's very hard for them to execute. That's really, it's really they find the line between the government role, responsibility, the private sector, and the play in that area.
Just a quick one. I think I like the point you said, the point, and your point, which is not different from Michael's second question to me. Why does government not get it? And I think coming from, I have invested in 22 African countries, and I can say that enlightenment is an issue. No, seriously. You see a government that says we want to create employment. We want to increase access to electricity. But the same government has a lot of stifling policies that will make it difficult for those objectives to be attained. And so I see a contradiction, and what can eliminate that contradiction is honestly advocacy, engagement, letting them know, this thing you want to achieve can best be achieved through this shortcut if you could do this and that. Because, you see, look at government, and just like what we're saying, you want to increase access to electricity. But in the same government or environment, people would say, don't allow, electricity is a national asset, it's a security asset. Don't allow it in the hands of in the private sector. So if someone can just sit down and say, what is your fear, government? What national asset? You can regulate this sector. Just put this, allow people, it takes almost 15 years to just even sit down and come up with a project to provide access to electricity. But this for a government that says we want to increase electricity. So I think that beyond corruption, it's a question of people not understanding the linkages between, in quote, the seemingly simple things, but yet extremely important in getting results. So we all need to keep engaging the IFC, and this was my advice when President Obama was planning to come to Africa, and I said, this trip to Africa should assume a new dimension. Let's not go and just criticize, let's go and engage constructively. Tell them you need to do this because this. Let it come from people that these leaders listen to. And as a few African leaders get it right, others will follow suit. But let me talk about power in Nigeria. It's just a little comment. The problem with power in Nigeria is not about stealing. There's nothing to steal in power. There's no power. You know, I speak because I own the biggest generating plant in the country. The issue has been that it was a dead sector. But now that it's been privatized, I believe that in the next, it will take 3 to 5 years before you begin to see progress. But definitely progress is being made in that space.
Okay, let's do a very short additional question and an uplifting question.
Well, yeah,
Not one that...
well, first say thank you to you because you bring so much credibility, Dr. Porter, to this field, and it's lots of silos out there, and you're really doing a great job of pulling it together with your writing and your credibility. And Michael Bloomberg is another very credible guy who just became chairman of the board of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. And from Wall Street's perspective, from what I can see, is there's a lack of quantifiable, sustainable accounting standards in these various projects that people are working on. Until we coalesce around some agreed upon set of standards and then hold the potential the people are going to receive the investments accountable to some set of standards, it's very hard to get Wall Street involved because it just feels a little too squishy in order to commit money that investors need a return on. It's not philanthropy. They need to get a return. And it just reminds me of the early days of these flat screen TVs. Nobody wanted to jump in early because they were $4,000. You knew the price was going to come down. So nobody wants to get in early on these projects. We all want green bonds, but nobody wants to underwrite them because the numbers can't be trusted yet. So if you can, direct your energies and efforts towards helping us get that, I think we'll get there a lot faster. So I just wondered if you agree, if that's one of the obstacles.
Michael, can I say one
please.
thing very quickly? I mean, you asked for something uplifting. Shall I tell you that, in my opinion, the whole field of shared value, the most uplifting element of that is something that we just hinted at earlier, which is the youth. The youth across the world, which is actually not even represented in this room, is our future and is the entire driver of the momentum that we're going to experience in this entire field. And that youth gets it. That youth understands and is better connected thanks to the technology that Jin-Yong was talking about. They have the ability to talk to each other across borders. They have the ability to learn what's happening in one market into another. And these people, what the World Economic Forum calls the global shaper community, these people are going to drive shared value far faster than academic research, thinking, or Wall Street, actually. They're going to force it upon us.
Well, I think that's the great place to kind of wrap up this panel and thank all of you for, I think, first of all, your leadership. It's just so exciting and so comforting and so rewarding to see people of this stature making this much difference in this area and willing to talk about it and be a little controversial when necessary about it and tackle some of the misunderstanding that we still have in this field. I think that I would just want to echo your comments. I think that in a way the most exciting thing for me of all about this notion of shared value is to see the way that these young people, my MBA students, react to this. I think that they, I think in general, don't want to spend their life with the purpose of maximizing shareholder value. Shareholder value is good, and we need shareholder value, and that's what investors invest for, is to get a good value for their investment. But that's not enough. That's not a purpose. That's not going to change the world. And I think the young people are acutely aware of societal challenges and societal needs in ways that really, it's almost unimaginable compared to earlier generations. We just weren't aware. And again, one of the precursors of this whole shared value movement is the wide and universal awareness issues of the environment, issues of climate, issues of health, issues of poverty, issues of small farmers, issues of water. All these things now are top of mind. And I think that's because of a history of growing awareness in a variety of ways. An NGO movement that had a priceless benefit for society in raising awareness of all of these issues. And I think young people are aware, and young people want to tackle these issues. I think what the next big opportunity we have is to get young people to understand that actually it's business and the private sector that's our most powerful tool. You know, I told the story yesterday. Until recently, I was a trustee of Princeton University, my school, undergrad. And when I was a trustee, I learned something that shocked me. I learned that we were given a presentation on what is the most attractive, popular job that all the best Princeton students want to have. You know, what is the most sought after job at Princeton?
NGO.
And you know, one answer maybe 10 or 15 years ago might Jin-Yong been your old company, Goldman Sachs. But it turned out it wasn't Goldman Sachs. It wasn't on Wall Street. It was Teach for America. That was the most sought after job. That was where there's the most applications of the most talented kids with the lowest probability of getting that job, was Teach for America. And that's because these brilliant young people wanted to make an impact on the world. And their definition of how to make impact was this marvelous NGO that was going out and doing things in the real world to make things happen. And related to that is the social entrepreneurship movement, where there's all these other young people that are building organizations that are trying to tackle these problems, and they kind of sort of look like companies in many respects. So again, you know, the title of my talk was kind of how do we make this really a movement? And I think the groundwork has been laid. I think the younger people coming into business today can and do think differently. And if we can all work together to continue to deal with the obstacles, the lack of trust, the lack of understanding and awareness of roles, the kind of traditional economic mindset of trade-offs, it's profitable for businesses to pollute. If we can continue to overcome through this group, through the collaboration, through all the ideas and learning that will be coming out and continue to come out of this area, I think we have an opportunity to see something very, very transformational. And I think the younger generations will be incredibly rapid in the uptake. And it will spread globally. And so again, it's phenomenally exciting for me to have these three people here. They're all heroes of mine. Their organizations are heroes of mine. And I hope you'll all join me in thanking them for being here. And